and welcome to Moms on Mics. I'm Joanne.
I'm Cash.
And I'm Sophia.
Okay, this episode we are continuing our coverage of the West Memphis Three, and this week we are going to talk about alternative suspects. While many people who believe the West Memphis Three are innocent will say that the police only focused on Damien, Jason, and Jesse, that simply isn't true. They looked at the other suspects that we're going to talk about, but the police did make a major error in this case, which ultimately was the biggest mistake they could have made. They failed to start their investigation where they should have, which is with the parents. In cases of missing or murdered children, you start with those closest and work your way outwards. So parents, then other family members, relatives, friends, neighbors, and so on. The West Memphis police didn't look at any of the parents until years later. And we will discuss the two fathers that were also accused. So John Mark Byers and Terry Hobbs. We're going to look at them later because they're get a whole episode just dedicated to them. But today we are going to discuss the other suspects. So when I first heard of this case years ago, this was my suspect number one. And I still go back and forth on this one. It's Mr. Bojangles. We have discussed him a little bit. So remember, this is the man that went into the ladies' bathroom covered in mud and blood at the Bojangles restaurant. And he got blood everywhere. The staff called police at 8:40. We unfortunately don't know what time he went into the restaurant initially, but the manager said he gave him about 15 minutes to get cleaned up before calling the police. It wouldn't have been too long of a walk from where the bodies were found to the Bojangles restaurant, but in order for him to have committed the murders, he would have had to have done it by roughly 7:45. Because Dana Moore last saw Michael, Stevie, and Christopher at 6. I would consider that the last sighting, to be honest, even though there was Chris Wall said he thought he saw them, I think around 7. But this being Michael's mom, I would say this is the last definite one. Yeah, I would believe her to be more accurate than anyone else. So that gives Mr. Bojangles plenty of time. He was covered in mud and blood, which you would expect considering the location of where the bodies were found and the brutality of the murders. He was acting strange, and the staff at Bojangles said that they thought he was having some kind of mental break. Also behavior you could expect from someone who had just murdered 3 8-year-old boys. There is also the bag of clothing and the razor that was found in the area where the boys were found. The fact that it was known to be a homeless person living in the woods. This could put them together, right? And the elusive, quote unquote, Negro hair found on the body of one of the boys that was ultimately lost. But you also have to remember the 5 splashes and 1 gunshot sound that Ryan Clark and his friends heard when they were in the woods at around 9:30. If those splashes were in fact the boys' bodies and the bikes being tossed into the water, then Mr. Bojangles didn't do this. But again, we don't know that they were the splashes, like that's what the splashes were. And not knowing if they were consecutive and how close together they were, it's really hard to say if that's what they heard.
The police investigated 23-year-old Richard Cummings. Cummings lived in the Mayfair Apartments, number 26, overlooking the wood. Cummings came to the attention of the police because he had drilled peepholes into the wall of his apartment. The neighbor found the holes and contacted the landlord to have them filled in. The police questioned Cummings and noted that he seemed nervous throughout the interview. He was described as steadily tapping his foot. The police asked Cummings about his alibi for the evening of May 5th, 1993. He explained that he got home from work around 6:30 a.m. and he went to sleep. He woke up around 1 p.m. Cummings was employed as a janitor at the Iron Skillet, where he worked the overnight shift. Cummings said that he was familiar with the Robin Hood Hills because he had walked his dog there a couple of times. During his interview on May 12, 1993, he told police he knew the boys had been beaten up and the penis of one of the boys had been cut off. Now, remember, the police put out the bulletin the night they found the bodies. However, they didn't say only one boy had their genitals mutilated. They said all the boys had. People will claim the fact that Jesse and Damien mentioned this proves their involvement, claiming that this fact was one that the police in fact did keep to themselves. Well, if that is the case, how did Richard Cummings also know this? Police asked Cummings if they could search his apartment, and he gave them permission to do so. During the search, police came across a box. When asked if police could open the box to inspect the content, Cummings declined. He claimed the box contained pornography. Police did not search the box. Instead, police took several items from the residence, including articles pertaining to the murders of the three boys, various hammers, a tire thumper, and knives. The WMPD do not mention Richard Cummings having a roommate. However, a police report pertaining to Laszlo Benyo states that Richard and Laszlo lived together at the time of the murders. Moreover, the same document states that Richard was friends with L.G. Hollingsworth. Police were informed that a similar type murder occurred in 1990 when a 12-year-old boy was abducted from a strip mall in Pittsfield,
Massachusetts.
The boy was sodomized and then his body was found hanging from a tree, almost a 4-hour drive away in Ithaca, New York, which is close to where Richard Cummings is from. The murder was similar in that the boy's ankles and wrists were bound with tape, and he was recovered from the woods. Norwich, New York was noted as being about an hour's drive from Ithaca and is also located just off the interstate leading to Pittsfield, MA. Louis Lent eventually confessed to the murder. No connection had been identified between Louis Lent and Richard Cummings. After the search of Cummings' residence, the police officially declared that he was not a suspect in the murders.
The fact that he didn't let them search inside that box is kind of concerning, considering that there was 2 pairs of underwear and 5 pairs of socks missing from the crime scene.
Well,
They do like to take trophies sometimes, right? So
yeah. So that was the police that was searching, right?
yeah, but they didn't have a search warrant.
So,
He just allowed
okay.
them to search. They just asked,
Gotcha.
and he said, yep. So then,
Yeah. Okay. Oceanside Police Department follow-up investigation report. Date of report 5/18/1993. Investigation. On May 15th, 1993 at approximately 7:20 p.m., Sergeant John Lamb of the Oceanside Police Department called me at my residence. Sergeant Lamb briefed me on a possible homicide suspect from West Memphis, Arkansas, now in the Oceanside area. Sergeant Lamb requested I respond to the police department and interview Chris Morgan, as West Memphis police detectives had requested our assistance. At approximately 12:36 a.m., Morgan was driven back to the Oceanside Police Department, where Detective Brian Whitebread and I conducted the following interview with him. Morgan stated essentially as follows. He was told about the homicides by his father while being given a ride to work. His father told him his nephew's friend Stevie was killed. He also spoke with his friend Bobby D'Angelo, who told him about the homicide. Morgan said he went to Stevie's house with Bobby D'Angelo because Bobby was close to his family. Morgan said he heard the boys' arms were cut off and that they were molested. Morgan used to drive an ice cream truck in the area, saying he had met all 3 boys before, that he had met Stevie about 3 years ago. Not in the statement, but worth noting, Terry Hobbs also worked for an ice cream company. Morgan said a friend of his named Lisa lives next door to one of the other victims and that the 3rd victim lives across the street from her. Morgan claimed he read about the homicides around June 5th, 1993 in the local newspapers. Not in the statement, but he had just said his dad told him about it on the drive to work. Morgan said he and Bobby D'Angelo were talking about the homicide when he told D'Angelo about what he had heard. From his father saying, D'Angelo began freaking out. Morgan said they went to an Exxon gas station and bought a newspaper. Morgan said that's when D'Angelo decided to go visit Stevie's family. Morgan said he thought it was strange. The victim lived right down the street from his parents' house, saying he was living in Tennessee at the time of the homicides. Morgan said he did not know the dates of the homicides. Morgan and a friend named Brian Holland were driven to California and dropped off in Newport Beach by 2 other friends named Beth and Rick. Morgan said they arrived in California on May 12, 1993, after leaving West Memphis, Arkansas, on May 10, 1993. He said they drove a blue Cavalier that belongs to Beth. Morgan said Rick and Beth continued north to San Francisco. Morgan said he and Holland are best friends, saying Holland has nothing to do with this. Morgan was again asked if he knew anything about the homicides. Morgan responded by stating he only knew what he read in the newspapers and word of mouth from Bobby D'Angelo. He said Stevie's parents told him the boys were all castrated and that the boy who lived next door to Lisa had his arms cut off.
Okay, Morgan said that he met Stevie's family a few times in the past, although described his relationship as being a very casual acquaintance, and the last time he spoke with the victim, Stevie, was approximately 1.5 years ago, when he sold him some ice cream. Morgan then said that the reason he went over to the victim, Stevie's residence, after hearing about the homicides, was because Bobby wanted to visit the family. Morgan said Bobby's and Stevie's parents are friends, saying they used to hang out with each other. He was then asked why he accompanied Bobby D'Angelo over to the victim Stevie's residence, taking into account that he was only an acquaintance of the family. Morgan said he went over to show remorse and to help them in any way. Morgan said that he was, quote, trying to be nice. The kid did get killed, end quote. Morgan said when he and Holland arrived in California, he called his sister Beth, saying he did not tell her he was coming, saying, quote, I wanted to surprise her. Detective Whitebread asked Morgan if he was a homosexual, and he immediately responded no. Morgan was then asked about what he did on the 4th of May. Morgan said around 1 p.m. he woke up at his apartment in Memphis, Tennessee. He went to the Mississippi River with Brian and Wendy, and there they hung out near the old bridge and the Rivermark apartments at 2 p.m. Morgan said around 2:30 he took a shower and went to Blockbuster Video on Union Avenue to check out a movie. Morgan said he sat around the apartment all night bored with his friends, Wendy and Stuart. Morgan then said after his friends left, he went to bed. He did not go to work because he believed it had rained and he didn't feel like it. Morgan was asked about his activities on May 5th. He said he woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning, put a pair of shorts on and his tennis shoes. Morgan placed his foot up on the interview table and showed me the tennis shoes that he was wearing, stating he was wearing these shoes on May 5th. Morgan said he had been wearing those shoes for about 1.5 months, saying he used to own a pair of Converse tennis shoes, but he threw them away in Phoenix, Arizona about 2 months ago.
Morgan said around 7:15 he went to get his work shirt out of his car, describing it as a 1985 Nissan Sentra, red in color with 2 doors. He could not find his keys, noticing his uniform shirt was in the back seat of the car. He said he called his boss Bill and asked if he had to wear his uniform shirt. Bill told him there would be no problem, that he would come to work without the shirt. Morgan said he then began to look for his keys, saying he couldn't find them, so he called his father asking him for a ride. Morgan said his father drove him to work, saying he clocked in on the time clock. I then asked Morgan if he went to work on the 4th again, and he stated no because, quote, I didn't feel like it. When he asked why he didn't feel like it, he said he had a lot of friends over the night before, saying he has not been getting enough sleep. I asked Morgan if he went to work on the 3rd, and he said no because it was raining. Morgan said on the 6th of May he was dropped off at work, telling Detective Whitebread and I that he did not speak about the homicides through the entire day. I asked him if he and Bobby D'Angelo had talked with each other that day. Morgan said, I quote, no, it didn't come across my mind. I was too busy working. Morgan became upset as I found it hard to believe that he and Bobby D'Angelo were so affected later on in the evening and that they would go visit the victim's family. Yet, throughout the day, he doesn't discuss it with Bobby D'Angelo while in a work setting. I asked Morgan to explain how the car wash was set up. Morgan pulled the pen out of my hand and drew a diagram explaining why he and Bobby D'Angelo could not communicate.
Morgan said he got off work at approximately 6 p.m. He said Bobby D'Angelo gave him a ride, along with a girl named PJ and a male whom they dropped off. D'Angelo then began speaking about the homicides, with Bobby bringing up the topic. Morgan said they went out and bought a paper saying Bobby wanted to find out if, in fact, it was Stevie, hoping that it wasn't. Morgan said D'Angelo didn't make the connection at first. Morgan said at this point they decided to go to Arkansas and visit Stevie's family. Morgan said they arrived at Stevie's residence around 7 p.m. Morgan said he talked to Stevie's mom, Pam, saying he ate some food and then helped them move a refrigerator. Morgan said he left Pam's house at around 7:30 p.m., leaving Bobby at the residence. Morgan said he went to his parents' house to take a shower. At 7:45, Bobby came over to his parents' house and began telling both he and his parents about the mutilations of the victims. Morgan said he did not know how long D'Angelo knew about the victims possibly being mutilated, saying he must have found out by somebody over at Stevie's house. D'Angelo told Morgan that all three of the victims were castrated and that one of the victims had his arms cut off. Morgan said D'Angelo then went back over to Pam's residence. Morgan then stated that around 5:50, he went back to Pam's house, and it was at this time he moved the refrigerator and ate some food. Morgan said around 8:10, he and D'Angelo went back to Morgan's parents' house, and from there left, going back to Memphis. Morgan said D'Angelo drove back at 8:30 p.m. Morgan then stated that he changed his clothes, and at 9:30 p.m. he went to the Red Square Bar located approximately 2 blocks from his apartment, where he stayed until 4 a.m. Then on May 17th at approximately 1 p.m., I drove in the city of Oceanside. This is a residence of Ladina Smith, the sister of Chris Morgan. I contacted Chris Morgan and asked him if he would take me to the residence on Camp Pendleton, where I could meet Brian Holland.
So at 1:28 p.m., Chris Morgan took me to the omitted location on Camp Pendleton. There he introduced me to Brian Holland. I asked Holland if he would come to the Oceanside Police Department to conduct an interview. Holland said there was no problem and that he and Morgan would accompany me to the police department. I told Holland the purpose of our contact, asking him for consent relating to photographs, fingerprints, and a sexual assault exam, and the interview. Yeah, they did the sexual assault exam on both of them, which I'm not really sure why. At this stage, I don't see what the purpose of that is, but whatever. Holland said he would cooperate in any way, giving permission to obtain the evidence needed for this investigation. At approximately 2:10, photographs of Holland were taken. At approximately 3:27 p.m., an interview with Holland was conducted, with him stating essentially as follows. He came to California with Morgan, a girl named Beth, and a friend of hers named Rick, arriving on May 12th, 1993, in Newport Beach. He said he and Morgan had been planning to come to California for about a month. While in Newport Beach, Morgan called his sister, Smith. Smith told Morgan to call a friend of hers named Brent and Tiffany, saying Brent would come to Newport and get them. Brent drove up and brought them back to Oceanside, where they are now staying. Holland said around the 5th or 6th of May, he was told about the 3 young boys getting killed, although he could not remember by whom. He said he saw news stories relating to the homicides. Holland said he believes he heard the boys had been castrated, beaten to death, and their bodies left in a ditch. Holland said that he knew one of the victims, Stevie, because he was related somehow to Bobby D'Angelo, saying, "I have seen Stevie around before."
Holland was asked his sexual orientation, and he said he was heterosexual. He was then asked if he knew about any sexual tendencies relating to Morgan. He stated Morgan had a homosexual experience with a subject named Patrick Milliken about 1.5 to 2 years ago. Holland said Morgan and Milliken had oral sex at the apartment in Memphis, Tennessee. Holland said he was not involved in any way relating to the homicides of the boys from West Memphis, saying the only information he had was through the news account. At approximately 4:58 p.m., Chris Morgan was re-interviewed after returning from a polygraph exam. I learned from Marshall Gaines, the polygraph examiner, that it was his opinion Morgan showed deception on questions relating to the homicide case. The interview went essentially as follows. While interviewing Morgan the second time, I noticed he appeared extremely nervous and far more sensitive after the polygraph exam. Morgan appeared to be pacing in the interview room and at one point placed a tissue over the video monitors so as not to be seen. Morgan was asked about his homosexual encounter with Patrick Milliken. He stated approximately 2.5 years ago, he did have oral sex with Patrick Milliken. I explained the medical findings related to the redness on the tip of his penis and asked him to explain that. Morgan said he felt that was normal. I asked Morgan to explain his social circle of friends. Morgan said he still hangs around with gay people, although described himself as being a heterosexual.
I asked Morgan if he recalled any other conversations taken place between Bobby D'Angelo and the victim's family. He said the only thing he could remember was that Bobby took a photograph of Stevie from the family. Morgan told me again he worked for about a year and a half driving an ice cream truck for Frosty Treats, which is located on Democrat Road in Memphis. He said he did recall serving ice cream to all three of the victims. Morgan could not understand why he had failed the polygraph exam, denying any involvement whatsoever relating to the homicide of three victims. Morgan said a possible reason for the polygraph coming up deceptive was the fact that he doesn't deal with death very well. Morgan became very hostile, saying, "What do you want me to do? Lie to you? I'm going to lie. I'm going to lie." Morgan said, "I killed them," and all that other bullshit. I don't know how he did it. I quickly asked him who did it. He stated, "I don't know, whoever fucking killed them." I then asked him, "How do you think it happened?" He stated, "I don't know. They were just 10 feet apart from each other in the swamp. In the ditch, I don't know how they killed them." I then asked him, "How do you know they were found 10 feet apart?" Morgan responded, "Because it was in the newspaper." It should be noted at this point in the interview, there was a tissue over the video camera. Morgan was standing on a chair with both his arms extended wall to wall in a very hostile, dominant position. Morgan again became very agitated, asking me if I was arresting him. I stated no, I was not. Morgan said he was tired of people trying to accuse him of these killings. Morgan said he was once in a lakeside mental hospital for alcohol and drugs. Morgan said he was being very honest and would tell me if in fact he had killed those kids. I then questioned him about why he had not told me about his homosexual encounter approximately 2.5 years ago. He said it wasn't asked. Morgan then stated that he has been telling the truth and that the polygraph machine was wrong. I told Morgan I was checking into the information he gave relating to the castration and the arms of the victims being cut. He reiterated that information came from the victim's mother to Bobby D'Angelo, who gave it to him. Morgan became very angry, yelling, "This is so fucking screwed up."
I told Morgan that I had a legal obligation to get the truth or exonerate him if he wasn't involved in this incident. I told him I felt, based on the results of the polygraph exam, that he wasn't being completely honest. Morgan said spontaneously, "Well, maybe I freaked out, then blacked out, and killed these 3 little boys, and then fucked them up the ass or something." That was a quote. I asked, "Maybe you blacked out?" Morgan said, quote, "Maybe I could have. There's no telling what happened." Morgan then asked, "Do you have a hypnotist?" I again stated, "Maybe you did black out?" And he responded, quote, "Well, maybe." I asked him if it was possible he could have done it. He immediately responded, "No." Morgan added, quote, "I've never hurt anyone intentionally." I asked, "Maybe there's 2 sides of you." Morgan responded, quote, "Maybe I'm Chris and Hyde." Morgan again said that he would like to speak to a hypnotist. I said, what if the hypnotist did in fact tell him he did have a blackout and killed those 3 kids? Morgan said, quote, "Well, I would expect you to take the appropriate action then." He further added, quote, "Well, if I did kill the kids and I blacked out or something, well, I'll go to jail for it. I would expect that." Morgan continued to deny any involvement, saying that he had no other information as to who might have committed the crime. At approximately 9:10 p.m., I conducted a second interview with Brian Holland. I told Holland that he was deceptive on his polygraph. Our interview went essentially as follows. Holland asked me if the questions he came up deceptive on were the same questions Morgan had been deceptive on. I told him yes, and he said, quote, "Well, I just guessed." Holland denied having information, saying that he heard about the incidents through friends and accounts in the newspapers. Holland added he rarely goes to West Memphis and that Morgan's parents can verify his whereabouts on or near the date of the homicides. Holland said his girlfriend Wendy can also vouch for his location. Holland also said that he heard on the news that the boys were found in a ditch. He indicated by taking his left hand to his left ankle, then his right hand to his right ankle, showing the binding positions, and then changed both hands to the center of his legs, demonstrating someone being tied. Holland said that he understood the seriousness of this investigation, saying this is why he is cooperating. At approximately 10 p.m., the interview ended with both Morgan and Holland left. It should be noted that the fact that one boy was found further apart from the other two boys was not in the newspapers, as Morgan had said. Neither was the specific way that the boys had been bound, as Holland demonstrated. Detective Gitchell noted that he believed the two knew a lot more than they were telling. He also noted that Brian Holland was the weaker of the two and that Chris Morgan seems to be psycho. And later noted that OPD labels him as crazy and easily set off. Police believed them both to be gay, and due to the allegation of sexual contact with the victims, they were noted to be people of interest. But they had alibis for the night of the murders. They had gone to some bars. Morgan said he woke up in his Memphis apartment in the afternoon, hung around the house, and later went to the sand cliffs, or sand dunes, on the Mississippi River with Brian Holland, Richard Christophery, and Wendy Holmes.
There's a lot of similarities here between Chris Morgan and Damien Echols' interviews and statements. Chris told police there were two sides to him. Quote, "I asked maybe there's two sides to you." Morgan responded, "Maybe I'm Chris and Hyde." Damien said that, quote, "Everyone has good and evil in them." Chris knew information about the crime that apparently hadn't been released yet, exactly how they were tied up and that they were separated. Damien told police that Steve Jones from the Juvenile Authority had been by to see him a day or two before, and that Steve had told him about how the boys' testicles had been cut off, and that someone had urinated in their mouths. Chris failed the polygraph test, and so did Damien. Chris had an alibi, and so did Damien. The police didn't pursue Chris because he had an alibi. However, they did pursue Damien regardless of his. When the defense called Christopher Morgan to the stand during Damien Echols and Jason Baldwin's trial on March 10, 1994, the prosecution objected, claiming there was no relevance to his testimony. The judge stated, "Well, I don't know how to deal with it. I mean, I read the synopsis of the report as well, and I came to the same conclusion that you did, that there really wasn't any relevant information to be gained by it, and it did not amount to a confession of any crime or even come close to it. But I mean, what do you want me to tell them? They can't call him. I don't know what use they are going to make out of him as a witness." The prosecution then states, "But Judge, the thing that bugs me is John and I spent 6 hours or whatever, well, going through 8 hours worth of videotapes, 2 days, and there ain't nothing in there that resembles any admissible evidence, and they never bothered to do it. We offered to give them all the tapes and before he gets up here, and they create a smokescreen that has no relevance. I think the jury needs to step out and let us find out what the proffered testimony is, or if he's going to take the fifth, or what's going to happen."
Okay, I just gotta bitch about this for a sec, but I will be quick. Are you fucking kidding me? This stupid ass judge. How can he say there's no relevance in this guy's testimony? He fucking said, "I did it. I killed him." Granted, he said he was lying, and to be honest, I don't think he did anything. But there is relevance here because it's no different. Like, he made a false statement. Jesse Miskelly made a false statement. He had an alibi. Damien had it. Like, it's so similar. I think it's complete bullshit that the judge didn't want to let him testify.
When Morgan was finally allowed to testify, he admitted to knowing Stevie Branch and selling all 3 of the kids ice cream before. He also admitted to saying that maybe he blacked out and killed the kid, and asking for a hypnotist. When asked why he covered the camera and got aggressive, he claimed, quote, "I was just sick of being there." When asked to clarify, he said, quote, "sick of being in that little room." He said he was questioned for 17 hours over a period of 2 different days. He took a polygraph test, which he failed. The West Memphis Police Department had talked to Christopher Morgan on May the 10th for 8 hours, and they didn't bother to transcribe that. They didn't bother to have a tape run, so what was said in that interview is not known. Christopher says he doesn't remember when he left for California, but it was roughly 3 or 4 days after the murders.
He was asked, "Did you tell him maybe you freaked out and killed the 3 little boys? Did you tell the police officers that?" To which he said, "Yeah, To which the defense said, So you're saying that you implicated yourself by telling them that you did it, didn't you? Morgan explains, I told him I could have done it if I'm blacked out. So the defense asks, did you black out? Do you have blackouts? Morgan admits he doesn't and that he just made it up. The defense asks, you just made up the fact that you killed 3 little boys to a police officer in Oceanside, California. Is that what you're saying? Just to get out, just to get away, just to leave? Morgan says, yeah. Then when the defense asks, you weren't even under arrest, were you, Mr. Morgan? You could have left any time you wanted to, couldn't you? Morgan tries to say they wouldn't let him leave, which isn't true. Morgan never asked to leave. Now, granted, he may not have been aware that he was allowed to leave at any time because he wasn't under arrest, but he didn't ask. There was a lot of objection from the prosecution. They didn't want Morgan to testify at all. They claimed his testimony wasn't relevant and tried to stop the defense from asking questions. The defense questioned why they only had 8 hours of the 17-hour questioning, to which the judge simply stated, I don't know. At the end of the day, it didn't really matter. Ironically, the jury believed that he simply made a false confession. In March 2013, defense attorneys submitted sworn affidavits from 2 men, Benny Guy and Billy Stewart. These documents detailed alleged 1990s confessions by local teenagers Buddy Lucas and L.G. Hollingsworth regarding the 1993 murders of the 3 young boys. The paperwork alleged that on the evening of May 5th, 1993, Terry Hobbs and David Jacoby invited teenagers Buddy Lucas and L.G. Hollingsworth into the woods behind the Blue Beacon truck wash to drink whiskey and smoke marijuana. While the 4 were in the woods, the 3 victims unexpectedly rode up on their bicycles. According to the claims, Hobbs became alarmed that the children were watching or spying on them and shouted, "You better get them, boys."
The documents claimed that Lucas and Hollingsworth were forced to chase down, grab, and hold the young boys while Hobbs and Jacoby beat them. The affidavits further alleged that Hobbs went into a rage after one of the children kicked him. He then used a pocket knife to fatally attack and mutilate the boys before the group stripped their clothes off and dumped them in the water. We will go through this more on a later episode, though. So John Mark Byers, the adopted father of victim Christopher Byers, he was heavily scrutinized in the first Paradise Lost documentary due to his aggressive behavior and a folding knife he gave the film crew that was later found to have traces of blood on it. He passed a polygraph test and was never charged. We will also go into more details on John Mark Byers also. James Martin was a convicted violent sex offender who was living in the immediate area at the time of the 1993 murders. His criminal history included a 1988 conviction in Tennessee classified as violent. Martin did not initially hide from the investigation. Instead, he notoriously inserted himself into it by approaching the investigators with a detailed speculative profile of how he believed the murders were committed. In this profile, Martin actually pointed the finger at victims Stevie Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs, mapping out a scenario that he claimed fit the crime. Because of his history and his unusual focus on the case, some alternative theories suggest that this detailed speculation may have been guided by actual knowledge of the crime scene, or that he was trying to deflect suspicion from himself. So Detective Ridge questioned James Martin and says, maybe we can learn something from the conversations with your experience with some of these sexual offenders. Martin says, yes. James Martin says, I work at W.B. Davis Electric Supply. The week of this incident, I was on vacation. Wednesday afternoon, approximately 5 o'clock, 5 or 6 o'clock. I'm not sure. A girlfriend of mine, her name is Barbara. I know I was going to forget her last name. Barbara, who lives in the area, had told me that there were 3 boys missing. My wife and I, watched the news report, and we say that the 3 boys were missing. I drove myself to work Wednesday at 10 o'clock to Flash Market. I worked at Flash Market Wednesday night from 10 till 6 a.m. Okay, so that was a quote from him. That's why it sounded like I was special reading that. So now remember, Aaron Hutchinson said that he and his friends watched 5 men in the woods, and he only recognized one of them because he worked where? At Flash Market. Okay, so yeah, so Aaron recognized one of the 5 men, right, from Flash Market, and this known child sex offender works there. So I think that's worth noting. Whether you, I mean, you guys can decide for yourself what you think about this guy, but he definitely makes some good points, but the whole Flash Market thing, that sticks out real bad.
Ridge. Basically, you understand you've been to a lot of counseling and has overcome a problem with being a Martin. Goes on to explain that he was convicted as a child sex offender because he molested his stepson and stepdaughter, and from 1984 to 1988, he was convicted in November of 1988 to 3 years in Colorado State Penitentiary at Fremont Regional Facility. I served 3 years at Fremont Correctional. He was discharged from Fremont in January of 1991. When Ridge asked what were some opinions he had as to what kind of person could have done a crime like this, Martin said the maximum people that were involved in these murders were 2. Any investigators know that most people with this amount of money being offered, somebody is going to talk. Somebody. I mean, you can look at all your murderers and in decades and find that people that were involved with a gang related, cult related, any form of a multiple murder that consisted of more than 2 people. Somebody is going to talk. Somebody is going to say something. Somebody is going to say something. Somebody is going to tell the police that the person is going to come in. They are going to get everything screwed up, and the next thing you know, that balloon. Everybody is going to fall into the pattern, and they are going to know who killed who and what happened. He said it was possible that only one person did it because hypothetically, we are going to take an 8-year-old boy. If you take an 8-year-old child and you put a position of trust on yourself where you've got the trust involved in this person, if that person was sexually molesting that child, you have 3 things. 1, the child is not telling anybody, so that shows that the child is trusting the perpetrator. The child befriends the perpetrator in certain points. When you have 3 victims, the perpetrator could have easily playing a game with the child, and because one of the child or all 3 of the children at one time thought that was okay for the person to molest them or do something to him, they could have been enacting a play role of a game. This in hand could have involved anything. Could have been playing cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, doing whatever. The child, I'm saying that the child was tied up because I read in the paper that they were bound. They were tied up before they were killed. So the perpetrator had to have gotten a trusting form of game where he could allow these children to be tied up. You have an individual, you have 3 8-year-old boys, one of them could have gotten away, unless they were all playing. A game where they could have gotten more or less felt non-threatening. When Martin was asked about the way they were tied up, he said, "No, I didn't go through any. In my case, in what happened, what I was convicted of, I turned myself into a psychiatrist and explained to him, I have a problem, a sick problem that I needed help. I have been ongoing molestation to my children, fondling them, having a form of fellatio, cunnilingus. I never did have any kind of penetration. The children said that they were some anal penetration with my finger and everything. I can't remember a lot of times what we did and all of that. This was most of the time. The guy that had done this, who have done it out in the open, they would get the child to trust them. They have to make it a game. When asked if they would bring their own material to tie up with, Martin said naturally, yeah, not we'll say they don't. Let's say that you're not prepared for this. We are talking. If this was in a sexual manner, okay. And like I said, I don't know.
Sudbury then says, just for the sake of this conversation, let's say it is. Martin replies, okay, the circumstances is sexual. You have a person that I believe that is not scared. Somehow or another, one of the boys didn't want to do this and wanted to get away. Or he felt, the perpetrator felt, things were getting out of hand and he had to control it. All perpetrators have to keep in control. You never let the victim control you. You always have to keep the victim. It's just like when I'm molesting my children. I was the one who controlled them. They knew that it was wrong in what they were doing, but because of my position I was in, I was able to coerce them. When asked if he thought that this is going to be a well-organized person or opportunist, Martin said, oh, this guy knew what he was doing. Yeah, he's not no dummy. And I am not going to sit here and say, speculation could be that he could do this again if he's not caught. The probabilities are 80% that he would do this again. Detective Ridge asked, do you think that he's always killed his victims? Martin said, no. This time was fear. He somehow or another, something went wrong. He had to kill them to keep them quiet, and he felt that his best interest, that killing them was the best way to go. And I can tell you this, he did not kill them in the place you found them. He killed them in another place. He drugged them there. He brought them to that point and dropped them there. So we're talking a person who's capable of carrying not all 3 children at the same time, but able to pick them up and take them. So we're talking it has to be a male within, and I'm not going to eliminate female, but I would strongly believe that this is mostly a male between the ages of 20 to 30. He was then asked, how do you think that this man is feeling, or whoever did this? Boy, man, woman, or what? How do you think they're feeling about this? Martin said, this man don't give a fuck. He ain't got no remorse. He feels like he's lucky. He probably feels that they will never catch me. But he has gotten to have left something. Everybody, I will tell you, this was told to me, and I read it in a book called Daddy's Girl. You have 3 people that know who killed each person, and 3 of them aren't talking, and that's the bottom line. You have more that 2 people, somebody's going to talk. If you have 2 people involved in this murder, if you have 2 perpetrators, that would be the maximum, I would say, because those 2 could really keep a little, because they could probably keep themselves up. Man, I'm not going to worry about it. They would try to slide it off. Those would be the 2 who were really, both would be sick individuals, but they would probably have no remorse for it. This looks like a sloppy murder for one. You're talking, if this guy, the reason why he put these kids in this ditch is to eliminate the bodies to cover them up.
This guy, man, he is just talking out of his ass. But I think it's important, like what he's saying is important because some of it, if you can decipher through the incoherent rambling.
Oh, yeah, it's hard to read.
Right? And some of it, I think, sometimes I'm like, he's got a very good point there. How would he know that? But then at other times, I'm like, dude, you just contradicted what you said before.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to note that the cops are listening to this. They're asking him, and they're using this as let's learn from him. What? Anyway, so Sudbury asks, do you know where the bodies were located? Martin says, I heard about it. I don't know the exact point and detail. But I'm saying that the bodies were found in a total different place than they were murdered. I don't have any information with the police and never told me anything. I'm going on this as speculation and from I've read and heard. The bodies were found in a ravine, I guess, or some sort of place where they were covered with water. He goes on to say that he thought the murders happened in a different location and that the bodies were dumped where they were found due to the lack of blood at the scene. He also talked about the punishment whoever did this would receive rehabilitation or counseling. I'm sorry, what? You murdered 3 kids and you're getting rehabilitation and counseling? Get the fucking electric chair, man. Like, he then talked about how he would have tied them up, would be to tie them with their hands behind their backs. I would tie their feet in, where their feet are together in a straight out, straight pattern so that their penis would be more or less exposed. He does elaborate more graphically, but we really don't need to get into that. Like, he went way, way too much than any of us are willing to read, to be honest. Even me. So y'all don't need to hear that. He said that he would have made it out to be some kind of game, like cops and robbers, to get them to do what he wanted. He said whoever did this wasn't an accident. They went into the woods knowing they were going to kill them, but then said that circumstances changed this. I am not saying that he was doing something and he accidentally killed one of the boys and all of a sudden he decided he had to do these two. No, I'm not. I'm not going to speculate that. Let's say one of the boys didn't want to participate and he said, "You're going to do this, and if you don't do what the fuck I tell you, I'm going to beat your fucking brains out." And he was just all hyper, and the boys, he just hauls off and hits them. That's not a perpetrator. That's child molesters. Okay, I'm going to say keep that last part in mind because I think out of every non-coherent, rambling bit of nonsense this dipshit has said, that is the most important and the only thing that I think is actually possibly true. Should I read that part again? I'm not going to speculate that, let's say one of the boys didn't want to participate and he said, "You're going to do this. And if you don't do what the fuck I tell you, and I'm going to beat your fucking brains out." And he was just all hyper and the boys, he just hauls off and hits them. That's not a perpetrator. That's a child molester. They are unique birch individuals. They have got to play down on the children. They have got to be children themselves, being over the wrong bullies. That's when that male or the men or the beast inside of them takes over. That's when they start abusing them physically. Most of your child molesters aren't going to physically abuse. They're trying to have sex with them, not trying to cause them to where they never do it again. 90% of your child molesters, if I molested this child, I don't want the child to run away. I want the child to come back so I can have sex with them. End quote. Disgusting.
He goes on to say, I would say that every child molester I've ever talked with in some form of fashion, he had some form of child trauma, whether it was physical, sexual, mental. They had some form of child problems during their time when they were growing up. And but now you got to understand. Let's say we take a physical person that this man may have not been a child molester. Just say that he was a physical child abuser. He abuses his children. Let's just say that he knew them and these children hypothetically caught him doing something. Well, bad boys get punished. And so, Sudbury, are you saying that they stumbled over something that he was doing? Martin, well, it could have happened. I'm leaving the sexual role here because not every case is sexual. We have to go to another part. Let's say that this is just a regular physical child abuser. His mind is going to be, and I've dealt with these kind of people too. His mind is that let's say that he was freebasing cocaine out in the woods. Hypothetically, it is probable. It could have happened. They stumbled onto, this guy is a drug environment and his mind is not even thinking straight. All of a sudden, he thinks that these children have caught him and, and they are on bicycles or he doesn't know what to do. They know him and they see him and he's scared that they are going to tell somebody that they caught him doing this and he may get into trouble. So what is he going to do? He doesn't really have an argument with them, but he scares the shit out of these kids and they just do whatever he says. Now, the probability of that is like what I've talked with my wife about, because she brought that up. And I said, that's possible, but the light ain't correct. Because if you got 3 boys, one could get away. They know these woods. I mean, they're like living, breathing area for them. They've been in there 1,000 times. They know the ins and outs. They know exactly how to get away. They'll just puff one, can escape and run for help. We're talking 3 boys who were Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts or whatever, who were honored and got, and if you psychologically looked at each child, each one were unique. So we're talking an individual who could have just inadvertently confused these 3 boys' mind that, made them in his priority of the den, where he could have killed them or molest them or whatever else he wanted to do with them.
Okay, so you remember the part we just said about in March 2013 that there was that sworn affidavit by Benny Guy and Billy Stewart? Do you guys remember? About Terry Hobbs and being in the woods and doing the drugs.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that a coincidence? That, I don't know. That just seems awfully on the nose to what Weirdo Martin just said here. Hypothetically.
He said whoever did this probably lived in the area, maybe even grew up here, that he probably revisits the area to gloat about what he's done, and that they were likely to kill again. May not be multiple or in the same way. He said it's possible that he only knew one of the boys, especially if one was hurt more than the others. They asked him if he had anything to do with the murders, and he said no. He agreed to take a polygraph test. Martin: no, my fingerprints. I can honestly tell you my fingerprints. My footprints, my nothing. No part whatsoever. My physical body has never been in the wooded area. The last time, that's the far I've ever been to Macaulay. That's the first time is when I went down there to look, and I can tell you the 2 days that I've gone. I went there one night. I was on my way to Flash Market, and I was just thinking about something. I got to thinking. I said, these boys had been troubling my mind ever since it happened, because I'm thinking to myself, you all are not going to catch this guy. You are not going to catch him. The only person that's going to catch this sick motherfucker is somebody like me. He's a sick, possessed, goofy, stupid motherfucker, because this is who you are talking about. It's a fucked up person. Sudbury: what would you ask this person if you really felt like this person had something to do with this? What would you ask him? What would be your first question? After you got the bullshit out of the way, who are you and what's your name and all of that? What is your question? Martin: how would I question him? 1, I would ask the questions that I would ask of a suspected person would be the number 1 question. The main question would be, what do you think about? We're saying a child molesting, okay. What do you think about a guy who sexually assaults a child? What do you think about an individual who that does something with a child? And be derogatory. Don't come up, be derogatory, because most child molesters get offended by, statements like baby maker, a kitty bopper, sexual perverted individual, making it make the guy, think, because if this guy is a child molester, he's going to take offensive, not me, because I know I am a sex offender. I know I am a child molester. So it can't bother me. If you want to sit here and say you're a perverted, no good, psycho, fuck you, it doesn't matter to me because I know I am. But if this guy was a type, he would take very offended conditionally. Like, this is the hardest thing to write in the world. Okay. Let's take a breath.
I just cannot believe the cops continued. Like, this went on for so long. Like,
Yeah.
if you're a policeman, at some point, did you just go, like, you know what, dude, never mind. Off you
I can't
go.
even
Like,
understand what he's saying.
right? It makes no sense. It's complete rambling.
It's just complete rambling and blah, 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 blah. Okay. Make him come out, see what kind of story he's going to give you as being a child molester. Because, see, number one, only a child molester knows what a child molester does. I mean, I could sit here and go into a room and have it full of guys who has been convicted of child molestation, but if but he sit there and deny it, you will know it. I don't know. So much to read.
So if anyone is still listening and has not turned this off yet, because
Oh my God.
we would not blame you. This is gonna be yeah. So James Martin failed his polygraph. No surprise. Specifically showing signs of deception on two questions regarding who killed the boys and what was used to tie them up. During his questioning, the polygraph indicated deception when he denied knowing who committed the murders. However, the machine did not indicate deception when he denied having a direct role in the killings. Martin described to police a scenario of how crimes were committed, prompting a police memo to describe him simply as nuts. Despite failing the polygraph on certain questions, he was cleared as a suspect on May 18th, 1993. Martin claimed to know the boys and suspected that Stevie Branch's father, Terry Hobbs, might have been involved. That wasn't everyone the police considered as a possible suspect, but it was the only ones that were viable, really. And we are going to stop there for this week.
Thank
Yeah.
God, I can't handle that talking.
Oh,
Right?
it was brutal. I'm like, am I even saying this right?
And I honestly debated putting this in because I'm like, this is all nonsensical and he's just rambling. But I do think there are some key points to take out of what he's saying, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting as he's saying he's a sex offender and he knows other sex offenders and he knows what they look for. And knowing now in hindsight what we know about Terry Hobbs, which y'all might not know, but we are going to tell you soon, it makes no surprise that that's who he kind of indicates. You know, I thought it was important to put it in there. None of these people have said any less or done any less than the three that were convicted, right? They all failed their polygraph tests.
It's so weird.
Right? And I mean, we can't even say it's the fault of the person given the polygraph exam, seen as Christopher Morgan and Brian Holland failed theirs in California. It was a totally different person giving the test. So it either goes to show how unreliable polygraph exams are, or that the information was out there, right? So these people did know things about the murders because it was out there already. So maybe that contributed to them failing the polygraphs. Who knows, right? It's hard to say. But the fact that the three were convicted for stuff that all of these suspects themselves have done and said, it's a crazy case. And if you are still listening, we do really appreciate it. We know this is a very long series, but I honestly think Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers deserve to have this case covered the way that it is that we're trying to cover it, and the way that other, like the prosecutors' podcasts, that they have covered it. Lots of podcasts have covered this case. Some of them have done it in one episode, which I don't know. Like, that's just a brief synopsis. Even doing, like, my ambitious plan originally was 3 episodes. That was very ambitious of me. And there's just no way. And I keep telling Cash and Sophia, I'm like, okay, I've got it narrowed down. I'm done. We're at episode 13. And then the next day I'm like, okay, got it nailed down. We're done. 14. And now we're at 16. And I'm really trying to keep it all into that amount of episodes, but I really feel like it's important for it to be covered properly because those 3 little boys still need justice. So
They do.
yeah, so that is it for this week. Next week, you're going to want to listen because we are going to talk about the infamous confession of Jesse Miskelly. And we are actually going to play his confession for you because we think it's going to sound a lot better than us three trying to read it out to you. So, and I, like Cash pointed out before, I think, I can't remember if I put it in, but it's going to be more impactful coming from like you hearing his voice. So that's it for Moms on Mics this week.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Moms on Mics Podcast, on TikTok at Moms on Mics, and join our Facebook group, Moms on Mics.
If anyone has any topics you would like us to cover, or if you have any questions or suggestions, you can